Welcome everybody to this week's class on the Holy Science. It's a joy to be with you today, and today we're going to begin. I'm going to pick up a little bit later in this class of what we were speaking about last week. I'll answer a few questions and then we'll launch forth into the body of what we're speaking about with the Holy Science. I'm broadcasting this from California, and so it's morning here now, evening time there in India. But as I was awoke this morning, I was getting ready to come to give this class. An old story that I've told many times to others came into my mind because it relates to where I'm going to begin, or where Swami Sri Yukteswar, you could say, begins. And it's about a famous artist in the 19th century. His name was James Whistler. And James Whistler was a landscape, very, very popular, very, still to this day, he's very costly pieces of art. And he was in London, and he was having an art showing, and a very wealthy man came to the art showing and wanted to purchase one of his paintings, a large one, but only on one condition. And that condition was that James Whistler would go to his manor out in the countryside and pick the place in the main hall where this painting would be displayed. And Whistler agreed and went subsequently with the painting, went to the man's estate. And I went into the hall, and it was fully furnished. And the man says, "I want to place this picture in a spot that is right. When considering everything here that's in the hall, where would it be best to highlight everything and complement everything in the hall?" And Whistler, without hesitation, he says, "You have this wrong. The first thing you must do is take everything out of the hall. Decide where in the hall, in the empty room, you would like this prominently displayed, and then bring back into this hall only that furniture which complements the painting." And the man was taken aback. Whether he did that, I don't know. But the point of this is make the priority. In other words, in that case, make the painting the priority. And I think this is the lesson for us in the spiritual path of what is our priority. And Swami Sri Yukteswar, he begins very early in his Holy Science. I'd like to read one of these first stanzas of chapter 2. He says, "When man understands, even by way of inference, the true nature of this creation, the true relation existing between the creation and himself, and when he further understands that he is completely blinded by the influence of darkness, Maya, and that it is the bondage of darkness alone that makes him forget his real self and brings about all his sufferings, he naturally wishes to be relieved from all these evils. This relief from evil, or liberation from the bondage of Maya, becomes the prime object of his life." Now this is, again, it becomes the prime object of his life. And so when you could say one of the marking stones on our path toward liberation is coming to that point when the priority in our lives are such that finding God, or relief from suffering as you would have it, becomes the priority. And so often in teaching meditation, teaching Kriya Yoga, people say, "Well, I don't have really time for this. I mean, how am I going to fit this into my life?" And when people say that, I remember James Whistler's story that people have it wrong. It's when we come to the understand that this is what I am going to do. God is the priority. And all things revolve around that. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and then everything else will fall into place. And if we make that our priority, somehow we find that the universe, if realizing that we are firm in our resolution. The universe has a way of conforming to our desires to seek God. But we're tested to that degree. And then to the degree that other things pull us this way, pull us that way, I got to get around to it, we're going to have to wait. In other words, God waits. And it doesn't, you could say, well, God doesn't scold us, and it's just a matter of, this person is not yet ready. But eventually, the time will come when, and it says here, as Sri Yukteswar is saying, where the desire to get away from suffering begins to drive us toward something deeper. And of course, in that teaching, that there are two sides to that. The desire to get away from suffering, but also the desire for happiness, were the foundation of the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda when he went to America in 1920. And they formed the basis of his teachings because it is universal. It's not sectarian at all. It's the basic fact of human behavior. Human is to seek something higher. Now, interestingly, though, and Sri Yukteswar doesn't say this specifically. Yogananda would say that the desire to be happy and the desire to avoid suffering. Sri Yukteswar emphasizes here the desire to avoid suffering as primary. Now, whether he meant it as primary or not, I don't know, but certainly he states it that way because the actual desire to seek happiness implies a certain volition. In other words, a certain choice. In other words, it's a solution. And the two go together. You could say one is embodied in the other, but nevertheless, Sri Yukteswar mentioned this first. We suffer. And of course, this is what Buddha explained also in his teaching. We suffer. And eventually we come to that point, each in his own time. And, sometimes people, I hear people say, about other people, they should be doing this, they should be doing that. And yes, perhaps that's true, they should, but really should is a word that should be used very carefully because people go at their own pace. And you cannot hasten that pace unless a person inwardly, in their own time, comes to the realization that I want something more. And when we do come to that point, that, you could say, is one of the marking stones of being able to start on that spiritual path. But very interestingly, this starts very, very early. You could say even animals and bacteria, they go towards something that satisfies them. So it's ingrained in the very essence of life itself to seek something higher than suffering. Now, the question, of course, in this is why does it take so long? It seems like, why does it have to take so long? And why does it have to be that way? Why do we have to suffer? Well, you could say, there are explanations, and I'll go into a few of them, but many people say, that if you didn't have, and as Swami Sri Yukteswar says, the influence of Maya, that we're fooled. But why? Well, I don't know why, and philosophers can't really ever explain why, but you could say if you didn't have this Maya, if you didn't have people being fooled, people being in delusion, if you didn't have this, we wouldn't have this creation. It's the very nature of this creation is to enter into, for whatever the purpose, divine purpose, into this Maya and find our way back. That's the story of creation itself. And ultimately, not only creation, but our salvation of coming out of that creation into freedom. So it takes time, but Swami Sri Yukteswar explains this influence of Maya. We have to realize that there is an active force, you could say, in this world that keeps us involved, keeps us embedded in this world, and it's expressed through Maya, and the expression you could say is, you might call it, avidya, ignorance. It's ignorance itself that is the obstacle. We just don't know. we don't want to be ignorant. It's just that we haven't yet risen up to that place where we can see through it. We can see through the veils. And it's ignorance that keeps us bound. But the point that we should understand as devotees, as disciples, is that ignorance has a power to it. There is a conscious power that actually is impelling creation itself to be in manifestation. This power of Maya, or the satanic power in the Western terms, this power of Maya is a conscious force with which we can align ourselves and get further embedded, or we can resist and try to find our way out of. And Swami Sri Yukteswar said it manifests particularly in you could say one of the primary expressions of this is we see this, we're fooled by this world, and we think that this world of matter, when we're in a human form, that we've reached that point where we can actually think about these things, because that progression slowly through evolution, the soul evolves ultimately until it does reach that human level. And when it does, we are fooled by the thought that this substance, this world, this reality that we see about it, this is real. This is the reality. And not only is it real, we attach ourselves to it. And this, you could say, the soul identified with material, the soul identified with the body, is the very definition that Paramhansa Yogananda gives to ego. And I think this comes from Swami Sri Yukteswar saying the same thing. The soul identified with body, with matter, is the definition of ego. We're attached to it. But we know that. But I was reminded of something in looking over, rereading, that Swami Sri Yukteswar says. He not only says that it's ego, but there is a tenacity. We identify tenaciously with ego. In other words, we cling to it, and there's an impulse to cling to the false impression that we have. And I thought, yeah, that's right. Have you ever been in an argument with somebody and you know they're wrong? I mean, they've taken up a false premise, or they've got something, and they know they're wrong, but they won't let go. They cling to it, no matter how much you try to, reason or whatever. They say, yeah, I know, yeah, but and they hang on to it, and they sometimes dig their heels in even more deeply, and that's just the basic nature of the ego, as it clings to it. But Swami Sri Yukteswar says these are the basic elements of what keeps us bound. We have ignorance, we have ego, we have attachment, we have tenacity, and there's also, we included a fifth one, which is aversion. Tenacity, and then, to whatever it is, and also aversion, likes and dislikes. In other words, you could say that there's an opposite also, that we put energy. And so these things bind us. And so this power is like I say, it's like gravity. It's there, it's a background, and we can't, just as we can't ignore gravity, think we can fly when we really can't, we can't avoid gravity. And so consequently, the spiritual path, because of that, this is why it takes a long, long time. We slowly evolve. But lest we be discouraged, and we don't want to, we have to realize that we should realize that there is also a counterforce that is ultimately attracting us back to our divine home in unity. And so these two forces are at play with each other. And and you could say, in the end, because this play of God is set up in a certain way, eventually everything will be drawn back into divine unity. But in the meantime, it can take a long, long time. And that really, it comes down to us, to the individual, to to ultimately learn the lessons. And I think this is expressed very nicely as the way Swami Kriyananda expressed it in the Festival of Light. He wrote it like this. He says, "Ever and again through your awakened sun the answer comes, the forming of stars and moons and planets, of galaxies revolving on the tides of space, of drifting continents, upheaving mountains, snowy wastes and dark, silent ocean deeps, had but this for its design, the birth of life, and with life's birth the dawn of self-awareness, a passage through dim corridors of waking consciousness to emerge at last into perfect joy." And so you could see there are this is ultimately the destiny of all souls, but the degree and the length of time, in a sense, it is up to us and we can go incarnations, we can even go, obviously we do go incarnation, but we can go eons of time. Even when the Master said, even when the days and nights of Brahma, over and over again, souls can be thrown out and drawn back in, and again thrown out again because they haven't reached that final goal. And this becomes the object, but when a soul incarnates finally in a human body, there eventually will come a time when that soul will long for emancipation, and it ultimately will want to find its way out of this labyrinth. And that time, as I said, is when that comes. That seed thought, ultimately, it's a desire. You could say we have many, many desires in life, but that desire for freedom, which is latent within us, when it actually comes and manifests and becomes active, that's a marker stone on the path to self-realization. It becomes, as Sri Yukteswar says in this initial reading, becomes the prime object of our life, of our spiritual life. And the focus and when that happens, one begins to seek. And as one seeks, the desire for truth, the desire for understanding, it begins to grow and grow and grow, and a certain process begins to happen. We begin to seek truth, we begin to try to uncover it, and very naturally, we will start to become attracted, because once we begin to seek, the universe is not neutral. It responds to us. The universe actually begins to feed that desire. When we have that desire strong enough, it begins to feed us through various instruments, books, ideas, thoughts begin to come. We begin to meet various people that will be able to help us. We meet teachers. And ultimately, we meet the Guru. Now, along the way, one of the things that, as we seek, will attract to us is we begin to attract to us other people who have similar feelings as we do. The power, and this is the magnetic power of divine love expressed. We seek the company of other people of like-minded souls. It's a natural stage. And of course, in the spiritual teachings, we emphasize the importance of satsang. This is something natural. It's not something that, optional, you might say. It arises within us to seek the company. It's mutual attraction as an expression of divine love. And through that mutual attraction of other souls, our love and our desire is enhanced. And slowly we begin to attract, ultimately, we begin to attract a Guru. And there, as it says, I'll read it, Swami Sri Yukteswar says, when man becomes fortunate, and we're fortunate through the magnetic power, we've attracted circumstances and we've attracted others when we've drawn a spiritual blessings to ourselves. When man becomes fortunate in securing the favor of any divine personage, Satguru, and affectionately following his holy precepts is able to direct all his attention inward, he becomes capable of satisfying all the wants of his heart and can thereby gain contentment, Ananda, the real bliss. And this, of course, is the critical step toward freedom, the ability to attract help and to cultivate it. And so we can see that the cultivation of this desire for freedom is essential, implying that indifference on the spiritual path is our enemy, and we attract the help that we need. We have a desire to change, but it takes more than simply a desire to change. I mean, that comes to us, that's the beginning. There's another element that has to be added into the mix. We may want to change, but we have to have the willingness to act. You see, many people just, I wish, I want to be different, but they don't act. They don't actually, do something about it. And that's the question that we're coming to here. And this is what the question, you could say, Swami Sri Yukteswar introduces the reasons why we should change, what we should, and what we should aim toward, what our goal is in life. And he sets that in his holy science, he sets that out. And then it leads naturally to the important question of how. And that's what we're going to go into in our next classes, answering this question of how do we change? How do we actually achieve our goal that is embedded within us? And I'll give you a hint, and I think you know this and you'll recognize this. And I'll read this from Swami Sri Yukteswar's writings. He says, the culture of love, the heavenly gift, as the principal requisite for the attainment of holy salvation, it is impossible for man to advance a step toward the same without it. And so, to sum up, our goal is to overcome suffering, and secondarily, to satisfy that deep longing within each of us for bliss, Sat Chit Ananda. To do this, we need to do the following. Secure the favor of Satguru, which you could say this is a long journey to get to that point. But when we desire to seek, ultimately, we are attracting to us the blessings that are going to relieve us of our suffering. And that is embodied in the very essence of what a guru is the reliever of suffering. And we secure that favor of the Satguru by purifying and cultivating the heart's natural love. We follow the guidance, and we can't be passive. We have to actually act. We can't just leave it to the guru to relieve us. Now, that might be possible, but it doesn't work that way. We have to act. And through that guru's guidance, we become able to direct all of our attention inward. The heart becomes contented. We immerse ourselves in the Holy Spirit, and ultimately we attain freedom. What the heart is looking for. And so this is where we're going to lead in our next class. So let's come back next week, and we're going to address this question of how the heart, the heart's natural love of the heart.